What is up, everybody? Welcome into a Monday late night edition of Shout a Buffalo Football podcast. A lot to get to, as I think Bills fans have spent the last 24 plus hours digesting the catastrophe in South Florida, the Miami Dolphins punking the Bills. I mean, it went so far as Mike McDaniel may or may not have driven over to the elbow room in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale to get after Bills fans. There's this picture of him in a car. I don't know if you've seen it on social media. I guess we'll get to that in a second and what the the loss of the Dolphins means. But before we get anywhere, my guest today, Chris Trapasso, kind enough to join us. And it's funny, I reached out to you this morning because you put a clip out on your TikTok page, which I highly recommend people go over and check you out over on that platform, covering the Keon Coleman storyline from a film perspective. I mean, showing some of the plays from his game. We're going to get to Keon in a second, but I want to thank you for taking us some time and joining us.
No, man, this is great. I appreciate you having me on. And now that I'm not with CBS anymore, I'm still looking for a job again in the NFL media industry. Like, to be able to have a platform to talk about what's transpired, not just in the last 24 hours, but the last 2 weeks in Bills land, the ultimate roller coaster ride. I'm very grateful to be able to come on this show and talk about it.
Well, we're grateful to have you, and hopefully we can get you in the roto a little bit more, because it is a catastrophe in itself that you are not out there working for somebody right now, because you're one of the best in the business for my money, man. So keep grinding. I know it's going to come up on the other side, but all right, let's get into what this thing looks like. And I guess the best place to start, we could talk about Keon if that's where you want to start, but look, what do you think offensively is the main issue here for Joe Brady, Josh Allen in this offense?
I think there's a few big issues. I don't think it's just one guy, although it might seem like I'm constantly piling on Keon Coleman. I think his weaknesses being kind of ignored by this Bills coaching staff, and maybe at times Josh Allen, where they're like, hey, we're just going to throw him back shoulders and vertical routes to a 4-6-1 receiver. That's an issue. I think there's also an issue in watching the film, and I'm not going to pretend like I know every single schematic thought process for every offensive coordinator, and then conversely, how defensive coordinators attack those. But in watching so much film, especially the last 2.5 years of Joe Brady, a lot of the same concepts, a lot of the same ideas. We've all seen that quick screen out to Khalil Shakir when it's an all-out blitz. They haven't really devise any other way to beat an all-out blitz. It's really that play or nothing else. A lot of the same deep overs to tight ends, and a lot of those same vertical back shoulders to Keon Coleman. So I think Coleman's usage, the fact that he has run the most routes of any Bills receiver, he has played the highest percentage of snaps of any Bills receiver, is a problem. I mean, some of that is due to the fact that he hasn't been injured and some of the other Bills have been injured. And then the Bills just not evolving that much schematically, I don't think, at this stage, from their everybody eats season of a year ago that averaged over 31 points a game.
Yeah, they've leaned heavily into who they want to be. And, we talked a little bit about it last week. I mean, they do drills in the early parts. I remember when I first started on the beat, and I'd watch the Bills, do one-on-ones at the start of practice, even in season. I remember some of the Stephon Diggs, Tre'Davious White battles over the years that were just electric to watch. And over time, I don't know if they move that to a different period of practice. We don't get a chance to see that anymore. But it's a stark contrast to watching them prepare over the last couple of weeks, and they're doing individual drills, and they're doing blocking individual drills for wide receivers. And it's just like there seems to be like a mentality, and I don't necessarily disagree with the shift to identity-wise to this run-first style that allows you to have this pitch, this fastball, if you want, whether you want to say it's your 2-seam or your 4-seam, it is a fastball to be able to run the ball so effectively. The way they ran the ball against Carolina a couple weeks ago, a team that was really defending the run well, I thought was a statement game, right? But the problem is you go back a couple of years when Brandon Beane was so steadfast in wanting to not lose the fastball that was this elite passing game. Why can't you have both in this world? This is a guy in Joe Brady who, he's been mentored in a lot of ways by Aaron Kromer, and Aaron Kromer's meant so much to this team. And I think the run game and the offense that they've had It has the fingerprints of Cromer all over it, and that's a good thing. But this is Brady who goes back to the LSU days with Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. It's like this guy was part of a passing attack that really changed the course of football in a lot of ways. And we don't really see elements of that. And it almost feels like there's no ways to unlock that. Everybody wanted Rashid Shaheed, right? At least. And I think it's funny because I've made the argument that I don't necessarily think there's a huge difference between a Shaheed and who you have on the roster already in a guy like Elijah Moore and a guy like Curtis Samuel. Are they the same kind of vertical deep threat? Probably not, but their speed. If you go back and watch their highlight reel over the last couple of years before they got to Buffalo, they won on the outside with speed at different levels and different routes. I think that's on Joe Brady to unlock that, and we just haven't seen that to this point. And Curtis Samuel's a guy that he wanted here, that he kind of pounded the table for.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up because there's been this big cry for the Bills needing more verticality to their pass game. And I think that would go a long way in freeing up everything underneath. Last year at the trade deadline, and I don't want to harp too much on the trade deadline because it's over. They can't do anything. But I want to say last year when they brought in Amari Cooper, even though Cooper didn't really produce individually, his threat down the field and the few big plays that he made in that Kansas City Chiefs game a season ago, had 2 long balls. That opened up so much space underneath for the run game, for Khalil Shakir, for Dalton Kincaid, for the running backs out of the backfield, that it really made every defense play the Bills at all 3 levels. And we even saw early in that Carolina Panthers game a couple of plays and throws from Josh Allen that were broken up where the Panthers were just sitting in zone, all playing downhill because they didn't have that vertical element, that verticality to the offense. And a great point by you in that Curtis Samuel ran low 4.3s coming out of college. Elijah Moore ran 4.35. They just signed Mecole Hardman to the practice squad, low 4.3 guy. So they have players, and Josh Palmer has been the most productive player in Buffalo down the field. That was really his calling card in Los Angeles. So there's really, even though I think they do need to make some personnel tweaks in terms of playing time at receiver, most namely scaling back Keon Coleman, they can't say, oh, well, we just don't have the horses at receiver to throw it downfield. I absolutely think if you're looking for that niche type wide receiver or just that niche type element to the offense, they definitely have that with those now 3 wide receivers on this offense.
You know, I think Joe Brady has been a good offensive coordinator. If you take the totality of the 2 seasons that he's been at the helm, I think he's done a lot of good things. I worry now, like I feel like the Bills are at a really important stage here with how this thing is going to transpire over the next couple of games, weeks, and really even want to put the emphasis on this week with how this offense responds, the kind of game that he calls. And I'm not sitting here saying that he's going to be fired if things don't go well on Sunday, but I definitely think that that seat is warm. We've seen Sean McDermott make an in-season change at offensive coordinator when he thought that there were issues. And what are the options, right? If they were to make a move, first and foremost, probably Ronald Curry, who's the current quarterbacks coach. That could be a lever that you pull. He called plays a little bit in New Orleans, I think under an interim basis. I'd have to go back and look at his chart. The other obvious name that's been bantied about today is Brian Daboll, which, okay, we could talk this through here, but like it's complicated because I don't know if you can necessarily remove Joe Brady and ask Brian Daboll to come in here and bring his offense, which would be completely different at this point to what Joe Brady has kind of evolved over the last couple of years. He took the quasi Daboll offense that Dorsey had kind of evolved a bit, and now he's kind of turned it into what he does now, along with Aaron Cromer, both of whom I believe were not here with Brian Daboll because Daboll took Bobby Johnson with him, I believe, to New York. And so I think it's complicated to bring Daboll in as offensive coordinator because of the unfamiliarity with the personnel outside of Josh Allen, which is very important, playbook, all that kind of stuff. But I do think that there's a world you can live in if people can rise above maybe previous, disagreements. Sean McDermott and Brian Daboll, I don't think ended on the greatest of terms, to bring him in as some kind of senior assistant, a passing game savant to come in here and add an element or some new ideas to what they do. And I was pretty aggressive today in the Monday press conferences. I asked Joe Brady. I took issue with the fact that he said early in this press conference that he wished that he had thrown the ball more early in the game against the Panthers. Well, going into that game, that was one of the worst passing defenses in the NFL by almost all advanced metrics. DVOA, their third worst passing defense in the league. They were without Chop Robinson, without Rasul Douglas, their top corner, without Jalen Phillips, who they traded away. This is a team that, you should be able to just throw the ball all over on. And to say at the end of that 60 minutes that, oh, I wish I would have thrown it more, that's an issue. And then when I kind of pressed him on it a little bit, he kind of came back and said, well, we needed to establish the run better early. And I don't feel like I got James Cook going enough. I feel like we're talking out of two sides of their mouth. I'm like, am I crazy here? And that's why I'm wondering, like, what's going on inside the building. Sean definitely came out and said he has confidence in Joe Brady, but he said the same thing about Ken Dorsey a couple of years ago.
Yeah, no, all that is, I mean, that's really good stuff. And hats off to you for pressing the offensive coordinator that I think after that performance, and really we kind of saw it throughout the first half of the season too. We like saw some hints of the passing offense not being as efficient and as consistent as it probably should be. So good job asking those questions. The Bills right now are last in the NFL in first down pass rate. So say what you want about James Cook. He's having his best season individually, but he had a great season last year that helped him earn that contract extension. The Bills were near the top of the league, or at least like middle of the pack in first down pass rate. And that has become one of those advanced metrics that you typically see. The best teams, the most efficient offenses are near the top of the league in first down pass rate. So I understand that you love your offensive line. You love your offensive line coach in Aaron Kromer, who's like an elite level guy in that role. And you love your running back that you just gave big money to. But Josh Allen is still the reigning MVP and the best player on the field when he's on it. So they cannot be last in first down pass rate in the NFL. And that's where they currently sit. So I think looking at those matchups, and it's funny, you bring up Brian Daboll. I agree with you. It feels somewhat far-fetched, but I don't think it's completely out of the realm that they could just bring him onto the staff in some capacity. I think back to that 2020 game against the Seattle Seahawks, where Josh Allen threw like the first 25 plays of the game. They like did not run the ball in the first half.
Yeah.
And that Brian Daboll came out and said like, yeah, we didn't really like our ability on paper to run the football. And they had a really good run defense. Their pass defense wasn't great, so we just said we're going to throw it 25 times in a row or whatever it was. I'm pretty sure they did not call a run play until the second half of that game. That was one of those high watermark games where the Bills scored 30, 40 points and really showed that they could move the football through the air. That was a coming out party game, one of them for Josh Allen in that season. So for as much as I understand teams being like, we're really good, we have an identity, we're going to do this, you do have to factor in your opponent at times. And I certainly think they did that immaculately well the week before against the Kansas City Chiefs. But there have been too many times, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. I mean, it's literally 1 week removed from Josh Allen setting the franchise record in completion rate against the Steve Spagnuolo defense. But again, there's been Falcons game, Patriots game, Saints game, where just the passing offense and the receiver production have not quite been there. I think you have to factor in mismatches and your opponent and what you're going to get from the defensive side going into every single week. It's a week-to-week league, as we've seen certainly the past 2 weeks, and it's a mismatch league. So you have to have an offensive coordinator that's taking advantage of those and exploiting those every single week, regardless of your opponent that you're facing.
Speaking of taking advantage of opportunities, exploiting deals, if you will, right now is the time to get over to Topps Friendly Markets and hop aboard the Savings Express as it is the season to save on groceries and all your holiday gifts. Christmas bonus underway at Topps. Shop at Topps and save $10 at all your other favorite stores and restaurants. With over 20 gift cards to choose from, there's something for everyone on your list. And don't forget to treat yourself to some extra savings too. Save on great gifts like toys and games from GameStop and Toys R Us at Macy's, things for your home from Lowe's, that new big screen TV you want from Best Buy, and so much more just by shopping at Topps. All right. Before we get to Keon Coleman, and I still want to talk about the defense as well, I want to push pause on the Joe Brady hot seat talk for a second and call back to 2020 2021 for a minute when Brian Daboll was still the offensive coordinator and the Bills had lost what I think before this Dolphins game was the previous worst McDermott era Bills loss. And that was the Jacksonville Jaguars 9-6 game, right? It's been talked about a lot. Bills were 5-2 going into that game. They lose that game inexplicably to the Jags. They come back and they crush the Jets. Then they just get their doors blown off by the Indianapolis Colts. And there they sit, 6-4. Very similar record to where they are right now. And then they go on an absolute heater. And we probably are talking about the Super Bowl champions that year, if not for the blunders of 13 seconds. And so I am not ruling out the Bills, who under Sean McDermott, year in and year out, have figured out a way to press the right buttons, even when they made a move off of Ken Dorsey. That was the right move that sprung them into a really nice run that also almost ended in a trip to the Super Bowl had they been able to get past Kansas City. I know they would have, I think, had to get past Baltimore as well. I believe that was the Stephon Diggs catch game.
Yes.
Either way, there's a precedent here to figure things out. And I think that Sean has pressed the right buttons in a lot of these situations in the past. And, he's putting his faith behind Joe Brady to figure this things out. And I think inside the building, there's no doubt about it. They know they have to figure out this passing game. I think getting Josh Palmer back is a nice piece.
Huge.
But here's the kicker, Chris. The guy that's really made this passing game go this year is Dalton Kincaid. He's going to be out for at least the next week or two. Hamstring injury, another soft tissue injury. This seems to be a recurring problem in that Buffalo Bills organization. How do the Bills navigate this next chapter here without Kincaid, maybe getting Palmer back, while trying to maximize this passing offense with a couple of, I still think, challenging games on the horizons? The Bucs defense is pretty good. I know they probably won't have Reddick this week. Then you have on the road the Houston Texans. That is about as tough of a defense as you could face.
Absolutely. And those are really good questions to pose at this point of the season. And it's a great parallel for those past Bills seasons. What I would say is, if there's any, I'm sure there are still Bills fans that are holding out hope, but I'll say this. In November, since 2020, the Bills are 12-9. And then in December and January, I haven't looked up those stats, but not a lot of losses. So Sean McDermott has not been great, and the Bills have gone through a little bit of, some negative stretches in the month of November during the Sean McDermott era. They usually start pretty well, September, October. November is that time where we've seen the Ken Dorsey change. You saw that loss the season before that to the Jaguars that you outlined. So I think it's a good point to bring up that they probably know. If you know it, if I know it, if all the fans know it, that they need to make changes and some alterations in maybe playing time or schematic stuff in the pass game. They've shown the ability to right the ship in the past and in general have been playing their best football at the end of almost every single season in the Sean McDermott era. So you could certainly think back to that and think that this organization, front office, coaching staff can still do that again. I think without Dalton Kincaid, it absolutely will be a challenge. And I'm glad that I got to bring up that, let's not go crazy because they're 1 week removed from the best offensive performance, I think, relative to the opponent in the Allen era. But when you are losing, let's keep it in perspective take that I wanted to have is to be without your top two man coverage weapons in Dalton Kincaid for most of that Dolphins game, the last couple of weeks without Josh Palmer and did not play against the Dolphins. It's going to be challenging for any offense, regardless of who your quarterback is, to get open. And you're going to see a quarterback who can't find anyone and the offense struggles. And I think you don't have to look any further than the Kansas City Chiefs. Xavier Worthy goes down on the third play of the season. They don't have Rashee Rice to start the year. Marquise Brown was dealing with an injury. And what were we talking about at the end of September and early October? Oh, are the Chiefs done? Is Patrick Mahomes past his prime? Can this team win any games anymore? Suddenly, those guys come back. They win a bunch of games. They play not a great game against Buffalo, but I bet the Chiefs, now healthy on offense, down the stretch will win a lot of football games. So I think we have to keep that in perspective too, that sure, the Bills' pass offense did not look good at all. It had its worst performance of the season against Miami without Dalton Kincaid from the second quarter on and without Josh Palmer, like you mentioned, the two most consistent and just efficient members of that passing offense that can get to the intermediate level and down the field.
What did the Bills do with Keon Coleman? And that's where I want to go next. And before we get there, you shared, I think, in the video clip, the graph. I think it combines separation. And what was the other part of that? What was the bottom
catch point score, which I don't really know how that's figured out, but I think it's just like how often you come down with the football in those contested catch situations.
What was crazy about that graph was, of course, Keon Coleman being second worst on it. DK Metcalf, which was there, which, man, the fall off there has been unbelievable.
Yeah.
The other name that was right around Keon Coleman was Jacoby Myers, which Brandon Beane was in the mix maybe for trading for him. And that is, to me, the criticism to me that I think is deserved when it comes to Brandon Beane is how he's constructed this receiver room, the way he puffed out his chest in May. And listen, if we go back to that moment, I think that there's context that is often missing from that interaction. And I think on one hand, it was unfair to Jeremy and Joe. But on the other hand, I think the circumstances of Brandon, who just felt like he had this great draft, and he's listening on Monday morning and wanting to hear what they think about these guys. And he gets kind of hit with a hot button topic that is fresh off the Stephon Diggs drama and the divorce there and everything like that. And I think he just kind of blew a fuse. Now, what I think people have really taken issue with is the way that he's kind of doubled and tripled down on it since then, right? Like the Bills kind of put out a couple videos about the interaction, documentary style stuff during Embedded. He's had this fantasy football line a couple of times over the course of the last couple of years. And all the while, I think looking at the construction post Diggs as miss after miss after miss. I think drafting Keon Coleman, I don't think Xavier Worthy was some savior that they were going to add to this room. But I think out of the group of 3 or 4 players, and I want to add Brian Thomas Jr. in because I think he was in range to trade up for. And that was the guy that I was pounding the table for. Like, I don't kill the tape like you do. I don't consider myself covering the team from a scout angle, but there's some things you just know when you watch a football player. And what he did his rookie year was exactly what his LSU highlight reel showcased that he could do. And what I thought was missing in this offense was Ladd McConkey a little bit of a redundant skill set to Khalil Shakir? Sure, but the thing that they've always said is they can play these guys in multiple spots. And there has been this hard-headed approach to Keon Coleman in a way that they will not play him in the slot. They are force-feeding him into this X receiver role that he's just not equipped to play. And what I think you pointed out so well in the video clip you put out on TikTok is the route running. It is, even from somebody that is naive as a football X's and O's schematic film perspective analyst, it just looks lazy. Nothing looks crisp. Every time you watch Stephon Diggs run a route, and I watched him for 4 or 5 years here, everything was just deliberate and sudden. There's none of that to the way that Keon Coleman ran any of those routes that you highlighted in your video. And I don't know what they can do with him.
Yeah, I think they absolutely need to move him into the slot. And that's kind of what I hinted at earlier, that they need to make some changes. I mean, I hinted that maybe they just need to scale back his snaps and the amount or the frequency at which he's featured, but moving him into the slot, if they want to keep him on the field like 70% of the time, which is where he's been at this season to date, you can't leave him on the outside. And for as much as if we think back to going from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady, the instant boost that the Bills offense saw was so much more pre-snap movement. There was motion, there was different alignments, there was stack formations, there was playing guys in different roles. And you're right, Keon Coleman is just the X receiver on the outside, like it's the early 90s or mid 2000s where you have just one receiver there, one's the Y, one's the Z, one's the X. I don't understand why that needs to be the case for someone that clearly now for a season and a half can just not get open as that boundary X receiver in the offense. So, and to answer your previous question, it's kind of a tie into Keon Coleman. Even if you just don't even do anything differently with Keon Coleman in terms of where he aligns, what about getting the running backs involved in the pass game more? That was like the extra kind of cherry on top last season that I think was very integral, like low-key important to everybody eats, getting the ball to Ty Johnson, and not just on screens and on throws into the flat, but down the football field. James Cook showed that he got those drops from earlier in his career out of his game. And those are mismatches, even though it's not what maybe fans want to see. They want to see that Stephon Diggs type X receiver winning against press coverage and beating man-to-man that they have not seen from Keon Coleman. If you get James Cook or Ty Johnson on a linebacker or on a safety, you are going to be at an advantageous situation if you're the Bills offense. So those are some of the things that I was trying to get to when I was saying earlier, the Bills need to make some big pass game changes. It's Coleman, and it's maybe using the running backs a little bit more, along with using some of the fast guys that they have on the roster down the football field.
Man, speaking of fast on the football field, if you want to be fast in your holiday travel, you are going to want to make sure you head over to Amtrak.com and make memories this holiday season. Have you ever been to New York City around the holidays? New York City during the holidays is magical, and taking the train on Amtrak is part of the experience. It's a great way to take the family or a group of friends. No driving, stress-free, and relaxing. You don't sit in traffic. You sit in comfort. No middle seats ever. A generous luggage policy, ease of travel, arrive in comfort, free Wi-Fi where you can always stay connected, and kids ride 50% all the time. Don't waste any more time. Head over to Amtrak.com for more details. All right, we've covered this offense quite a bit here in almost 30 minutes. I want to spend a few minutes here on the defense because I think the Bills have a serious linebacker problem that, I asked Bobby Babbage today if when Shaq Thompson is available and healthy, if there will be consideration to making a change at middle linebacker, and he didn't rule it out. He defended Terrell Bernard. He said that he knows that it hasn't been good enough, and he needs to be better, and he's as motivated as anybody in that room to fix it. This is the captain, Chris. This is the guy that they just gave an extension to. It's not a monster extension. It's actually, if you look through the details of that deal, it's not one that the Bills are necessarily tied to the player for very long. So it was a smart extension for Brandon Beane from that perspective. But a guy that you drafted in the third round that you basically handed this defense to, he's not playing at a level where if you go up against the Indianapolis Colts or the Baltimore Ravens in the playoffs, I don't know how you win the game. I think that there's issues at all three levels. Jordan Poyer's coming off a pretty poor game in terms of missed tackles, angles, all those kinds of things. He's 33, 34 years old. I think that's the expectation. Maybe it's time to have the Jordan Hancock discussion. But at the linebacker spot, you're paying two guys now on a second and on a third contract that aren't providing adequate production at their position. And one of them is one of your all-time greats of this era in Matt Milano. I mean, this is an all-pro caliber player that's just been ravaged by injuries. What do you do if you're Sean McDermott in this defense?
Yeah, I think Dorian Williams needs to play more. I mean, he's maybe still a little bit more limited, I think, in everyone's mind in coverage than a Matt Milano and a Terrell Bernard. But like you pointed out, those two linebackers that predominantly have been good in coverage and in space in their careers have not been great in coverage this season, and they're pretty small. Dorian Williams has been that hammer against the run. He's a quarterback spy typically. He's very good with range to the sideline. He's a great blitzer too. So it's been, to me, a little weird that whenever Bernard and Milano are healthy, Dorian Williams plays like 2 snaps. He played 3 snaps against the Miami Dolphins. And I know the game maybe got out of hand-ish a little bit in the second half. But I think Dorian Williams needs to be out there more. I think when Shaq Thompson is healthy, he should be on the field a fair amount. And against the Kansas City Chiefs, Jordan Hancock played a lot of, almost the entire game. And then he barely plays against the Miami Dolphins. So similar to what needs to be happening, these tough conversations on the offensive side, these difficult conversations and decisions need to be had on the defensive side as well. I actually think the defensive side has right now a little bit more upside because there's guys getting healthier. TJ Sanders potentially coming back, Shaq Thompson potentially coming back. They have the ability, and we've seen flashes, obviously, from some of these newer pieces, Larry Ogunjobi and obviously Maxwell Hairston. But you got to play the players that are earning it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be on the field because you were an all-pro in 2021. I think even Taron Johnson, before his injury, was not playing up to snuff. And maybe that was due to injury, but I think Cam Lewis has filled in reasonably well as that nickel corner. So I think the Bills need to say, look, it's good to have Jordan Poyer. It's good to have his communication, his leadership. Same with Terrell Bernard. And I'm not suggesting that both of those players get benched and never see the field again, but I don't think the Bills should be just clinging to those, to the name recognition or what they've done in the past when you have some younger athletic players that have shown that they can make some plays if they're on the football field.
So Landon Jackson goes down. It doesn't seem like it might be season ending, but again, there's been such a lack of impact that I don't know if he necessarily factors into things anyway.
No.
I think we also learned, I joked about this. I know I've said this a couple times on the podcast, and I'm kind of like a broken record here, but a lot of fans have been in my DMs, my mentions, like trade ideas up to the deadline. Everybody wants to throw AJ Epinesa into every trade idea. And I've constantly said, like, this guy is a little bit more important than I think a lot of Bills fans give him credit for. I think he's had a really solid season.
He's having his best season.
Yeah, and he's never going to be a 15-sack guy. And I think sometimes you give a first or second round pick and you put him in that box and you say that's what you need him to be. But like for a team that struggles to stop the run, he's as important as almost anybody on that defensive line. For, he wasn't out there, and I felt like there was a lot of, missed assignments at the first level. So that's number one. You take that trio, you get Joey Bosa hopefully healthy with that club situation on his hand. Michael Hoyt is an irreplaceable piece. And I thought Javon Solomon was pretty invisible in this last game. But I also thought that was exacerbated by Epinesa not being out there. Sanders, I want to ask you about, because you have Walker, you have Daquan Jones, you have Ogunjobi, and, Fedarian Mathis, Jordan Phillips, whatever you want to do there. What is the upside of Sanders the rest of the way? Because depending on what happens with Ed Oliver, you need him to be some type of impactful presence on this line. I know he wasn't drafted to be a run-stopping force, but do you see a path to pass rush juice for him in some scenarios down the stretch if he gets healthy? By the way, I saw him walking around in Miami, nothing on the legs. It seemed like he was moving around pretty well. So I think the fact that they're opening up his window this week is a very good sign that he's getting close to a return.
Yeah, if TJ Sanders is fully healthy from that knee injury, and obviously, I mean, you saw him, and the fact that he didn't have a brace on is a good sign for the Bills. If he's healthy, TJ Sanders can be a very impactful up the field pass rusher. And I think it's so funny, and again, this is kind of the theme of this interview, how quickly things can change in the NFL. If TJ Sanders returns, the Bills will have gone from like, oh my gosh, they have like no one at defensive tackle, to I think a really good diverse rotation of 4 players. You have the 2 veterans in Daquan Jones and Larry Ogunjobi, who are in their 30s. They're good against the run. They're decent against the pass. And then these 2 youngsters, these 2 rookies, and Deion Walker, who's been maybe the most consistent player on the Bills defense all season outside of Joey Bosa and Greg Rousseau, and TJ Sanders, who was playing well. His pressure rate was close to 10%, which is really where you want to be at defensive tackle before his injury. So it might take a little bit of time against the run, but to answer your question specifically, TJ Sanders has the athleticism, the first step quickness, the pass rush moves, and the power to be a very good rotational piece that can push the pocket in those obvious passing situations.
We're going to do our show with Josh Reed and Carl Jones tomorrow on Tuesday. So we'll get much more into Keon. Sean McDermott had some comments on him today that will kind of fire up as well. I'm going to give you the stage here to close it up. Any final big burning thoughts on this Bills team, something that needs to happen down the stretch? And, I mentioned the fact that with the way this run defense has looked at times this year, to me, that's the biggest fear in terms of matchups in the playoffs. I'm not necessarily afraid of the Bills not winning the division. I mean, they've won the division 5 years in a row, and it hasn't really yielded results. I mean, we've seen teams go on runs as wild card teams over the year. I think the Chiefs had done it one year. I think the Eagles did it one year. I don't know if they won it that year, but went on pretty good playoff runs. Is there something that you feel like, what's your biggest concern about this team down the stretch?
My biggest concern is the passing offense, because I think in today's NFL, and it's been like this for a while, and Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have said it, that they understand this, that it's all about how efficiently you pass the football and how efficiently you stop the pass. And I think, honestly, with Maxwell Hairston, he's raised the ceiling of the cornerback room. Cole Bishop, the last 2 weeks, has been awesome. I think eventually they will understand that the more athletic Jordan Hancock, who's a very good tackler and was at Ohio State, needs to be on the field more frequently than Jordan Poyer. Again, still have Poyer teaching in the room and active. I think as they get healthier up front, I actually think the run game and the defense will be fine, although obviously that's been kind of the issue in the playoffs. I have the biggest concern with the passing offense, and until I see like schematic changes and a different philosophy in terms of target dispersion and where Josh Allen is going with the football, and if they can hit some big plays, and maybe that will only come when Josh Palmer and Dalton Kincaid are back. That's my biggest concern, and I think they ultimately that will be what decides this Bills season. Can they get more contribution from the wide receiver position and get Josh Allen just back to his more comfortable self where he's not solely leaning on off-script stuff down the stretch in this season?
Chris, I got the video here, man.
Yeah,
it just got tweeted
it.
Across my timeline, and we got to get this. So this is at Elbow Room, which is right on Los Olas, right down in Fort Lauderdale, where Bills Mafia basically takes over this street. I actually stayed 2 blocks down at one of the hotels there, walked by Elbow Room on Saturday night. It's always bumping. This is Mike McDaniel in this vehicle after the Dolphins beat the Bills. He is rolling by. Say hi to Bills fans after his team just beat the Bills.
Oh my God. That is so good.
So what are our thoughts on this?
Good for him.
So
good for him. Right? I mean,
it's
a 2-7 season. They get their biggest win of, I don't know, maybe the whole McDaniel era, because they haven't really beaten the Bills outside of that Heat game a few years ago. They've been very bad against teams above 500. They've beaten up on the bad teams in the NFL. So this is like his marquee win at this point. I mean, am I someone that like loves like the taunting stuff? Not necessarily, but some of the gamesmanship like that, as long as he's not swearing at anybody or trying to get into a fight, just driving by, I'm actually okay with it.
I'm definitely okay with it, but I have mixed feelings about it because, number one, you're the head coach of an NFL football team.
True.
The Bills have absolutely dominated you for your entire tenure as head coach, and you get one win. Now, it was a really good win against a Bills team that, was amongst the Super Bowl favorites going into this game. So, I mean, yeah, feel yourself a little bit. He's probably heard a lot from Bills fans over the years, so maybe that was the impetus behind this. I think it's also kind of badass to just like, I don't know. Sometimes the everyday man thinks about what they would do or woman would do in these kinds of situations. And I don't know, like I texted Carl Jones after I had Jonathan Taylor and Jahmyr Gibbs absolutely devastate him in our fantasy league this week. And so like, I don't know. I respect a little bit the vibes, and he will hear about it on our episode of BKL Makes Me Want to Shout tomorrow. But besides that, I think it's fine. I actually think McDaniel's come a long way for me in the last couple of weeks, just how he's weathered the storm of that organization in this season and losing Tyreek and Tua, the benching questions. To have this kind of performance says a lot. I've been down on McDaniel for a while. Let me ask you a quick question before we get out of here.
Sure.
Somehow, Joe Brady is not the offensive coordinator next year. He takes a head coaching job somewhere, maybe Penn State, maybe an NFL team. He's fired. Something, bad happens and he's not. You could start 2026 with the offensive coordinator of your choice, Brian Daboll or Mike McDaniel, who's, let's say, hypothetically fired by the Miami Dolphins at the end of the season. Who are you picking?
I think you got to go with Brian Daboll. I mean, not to suggest that Mike McDaniel is not a good offensive coach. I think we would all agree that maybe he hasn't had the best head coaching tenure, but offensively, typically the Dolphins are pretty explosive. For as much as my brain first went to, oh, you should look for someone on the Kyle Shanahan tree. If you really get nitty gritty with that, so much of the, outside of Joe Burrow with Zach Taylor, that offense in general is quick strike, play action. It's very quarterback friendly, but it's almost like they don't necessarily want a big freakazoid at quarterback. They want to maximize yards after the catch. I think the camaraderie and the connection that Daboll and Josh Allen had, how good they were together from 2018 all the way through 2022 or 2021, whatever it was. I think you have to bring that familiarity back. And it would make a lot of sense to have someone that you necessarily wouldn't be worried about like leaving the next season if they have one good year offensively, because he would have just been hired or fired as the Giants head coach. So I would lean pretty heavily Brian Daboll, but it is a good question because I do think Mike McDaniel understands offense and is a good offensive play caller.
Selfishly, I'm hyped that you're a little more, not that you aren't always available, but maybe to get you a little bit more regularly in the rotation here, man. This was
Absolutely. I
been
would love that.
40 minutes of just great Bills talk. And I appreciate you taking some time during Packers Eagles. Also, I'm having you miss the start of that game. I really appreciate you making some time. Let everybody know where they can find your content, where it's popping out right now.
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of film analysis right now on YouTube and on TikTok, not just the Bills, the entire NFL. So go on either of those platforms. You'll see some little 1 to 2 minute videos. Try to keep it short and sweet, but pack as much analysis, observation, and advanced stats into all those videos.
Oh my gosh. Quick 30 seconds, 45 seconds. McCole Hardman, anything?
I think so. I think he can be a good returner that gives a spark there. And they signed him, I don't think just for that. I think they want to at least have, like I said at the outside of this, the threat of the downfield pass. You need to have that. 3 defenses, or maybe even more, 4 or 5 defenses in a row, I think have been sitting on everything underneath and at the intermediate level against this Bills offense. If you have one of those 3 guys that ran in the low 4.3s down the field, then I think it can open up a lot for this Bills offense like Amari Cooper did last year.
Yeah, I think it could be. I think this room could look a lot different here in a couple of weeks. I mean, you got Gabe Davis coming up, ramping up. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know if it replacing some of the Keon snaps or if maybe it's a switch for Tyrell Shavers. We'll see. I think also they'll see how it responds. I don't think Gabe Davis is going to be you're going to come in and play 90% of the snaps like he was a couple of years ago. I mean, he's coming off a pretty serious knee injury. So I think you're going to, keep those expectations low.
Elijah Moore is the one for me. I think he's the one that I think could seamlessly move into an X type role where he is playing the 50 to 70% of the snaps. And again, we've seen Keon 70%, can get open. He's a good route runner and has that verticality to his game.
You got to try something. You got to try something.
They do.
You can't keep doing the same thing over and over again. Chris, it's been so great. We'll get into so much more the rest of the week, and we'll have Chris back again soon. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks, Matt.